Hello there everybody, Sam Strange here and welcome back to the Railway. Today I'm trying to find out who is Britain's largest model railway manufacturer in 00 scale. And for many years the leading brand of 00 model railways has been considered to be Hornby. And they still think that they are, as you can see by their website here. But for a while now it's started to feel like that has changed, with more and more other manufacturers announcing new models for the scale. So that had me wondering, is Hornby still leading the way for new models in 00 scale, or have they been overtaken now? I think it's fair to say that Hornby and Bachmann do still seem to have the largest product ranges, but a lot of these ranges are made up of older models that have been re-released. For me, the true brand leader is the one that's investing in the most new-tooled models. So to find out who that is, I've decided to compare the number of new models that have been released and announced by each of the major manufacturers over the past year. So that's the 1st of September 2023 to the 1st of September 2024. So this has meant that I've undertaken the ridiculous task of trying to count every single release and announcement from each of the major manufacturers over the past year, which is obviously very difficult and a little bit silly. And for full disclosure, I've probably missed a few announcements or releases. I've tried not to, I've checked and double checked, but I feel like it's almost inevitable that I might have missed something. So please do comment down below and let me know if I have. And also bear in mind, this is just supposed to be a rough guide only, just in case I have missed anything. Also, I've had to take a few measures to make this a little bit simpler, so I've got a few rules that I've stuck to in this little study, if you want to call it a study. So, first of all, I'm only applying this to new models, so not variations of existing models or sort of new batches of existing models. I'm only counting brand new tooled models for this. Also for this, I'm only counting new locomotives and rolling stock. I do realise this is not the complete picture, and there are lots of manufacturers that like to focus on scenery and accessories and other types of model railway products, but I'm only one person, I'm doing this by myself. If I'd have counted every single new bit of scenery or accessory, this would have just been an unmanageably large project. So I'm sticking to locos and rolling stock. I think those are the kind of main items in this hobby, and they're the ones that most people are mainly interested in. I'm only covering 00 scale, of course. Obviously, other scales are available, but I'm not including those today. Also, I'm not counting each variation of a certain model as a separate product. So, for example, the Bachmann Class 31 has loads of different variations in lots of different liveries, and I realise that a lot of work goes into creating those variations, so I'm not trying to diminish that in any way, but just to keep things simple, I'm lumping models like this together and calling them a single product. Again, this video is just intended to give you a rough idea of which manufacturer is the most prolific at the moment. Finally, I've not been able to include every single manufacturer in this video. I've just tried to pick what I consider to be the largest ones. Again, this is not ideal, but in the interests of time, I've had to leave a few out. But I do want to give honourable mentions to Kerno, who produce quite a lot these days actually, Cavalex, KR Models, Sonic Models, Oxford Rail, and anybody else that I might have missed. So with that, let's get started, and I'm going to reveal the least prolific manufacturer over the past year. And that was Heljan. So Heljan, by my count at least, only made 3 announcements over this past year and made 2 new releases. Now, this was a little bit tricky to put together because Heljan's news page on their website is incomplete and they don't seem to always update it. So that's meant that I've had to go elsewhere for a lot of this information, which means I might have missed something. So if I have, I do apologise, it's not intentional. Please do comment down below if I have, and I will add to the description anything that I have missed. So they've announced the U1 Garrett. That was a pretty major announcement, to be fair. The Super Sprinters, the Class 153 and 155, and the new tooled Class 44 Peak. In terms of new releases, they released the Class 47 or 57. Apparently a bit of a disaster this was, but they released it. And they also released their exclusive 18100 gas turbine, which was available from Rails. So Heljan's ratio of new announcements to new releases is 1 to 0.7. So they're actually announcing slightly more than they're releasing. Now, to be clear, Heljan do have lots of other projects underway, so perhaps next year we'll see a lot more releases from Heljan. Also, Heljan don't just operate in 00 scale, they also have a number of O-gauge models on the way too, which obviously take up their resources and time. But because we're just dealing with 00 scale today, that is it for Heljan. The next smallest manufacturer is quite surprising because they've long been considered to be one of the big boys, but in second place was Bachmann. Now that is just Bachmann, I'm not including EFE rail stuff in here because a lot of that was developed by other manufacturers, mainly Kerno, some of it Heljan as well. But just in terms of Bachmann, they've only managed to announce 4 new models by my count, and they've only made 2 new releases. So their new announcements have been the HRA hopper in 00 scale, the Class 30 and Class 31, which, like I was saying, is a pretty large range, the BR PAL vans, and also the new suite of Class 08 and 09 shunters. Again, lots of products within this range. In terms of new releases though, like I say, they only managed 2. The first one was the new HRA hopper, and the Class 30s and 31s are out now. So assuming I've not missed any, their ratio of announcements versus releases is 1 to 0.5. So they're announcing roughly twice as many models as they're releasing, if this past year is anything to go by. Now obviously Bachmann have divided their attention quite a lot recently between 00 scale and narrow gauge scales such as 009 and NG7. Those narrow gauge scales do seem to be getting a lot of love from Bachmann at the moment, so possibly they're shifting their focus away from 00 scale to these other slightly more niche scales. Next up then we have Dapol, which again I think is quite surprising. Who would have thought that Dapol would be bigger than Bachmann? But in terms of new locos and rolling stock over the past year, they do seem to be. So in 00 scale, they have made 3 new announcements and they've made 3 new releases. Their announcements were the Class 323 DMU, that's quite a major product. They also announced the Class 14XX and 5800 locomotives, quite a large range of models within that announcement, and also the Class 517, which is a similar 042, but it looks different enough that I think we can consider that a separate product. In terms of releases, they've launched the Air Ministry tank wagons, which do look very nice actually. Obviously the Hawthorne Leslie tank engines, which were absolutely amazing, and also the Top Light City coaches. Again, there was a whole massive range of these coaches released. So that's a ratio of 1 to 1 in terms of announcements versus releases, which is very sensible. It means that they're announcing models at the same rate that they're releasing them. Now, Dapol have their finger in a lot of different pies. They produce masses of N-gauge models and O-gauge models too, so if you were to include all of that, I think they would be one of the most prolific manufacturers. But in terms of 00 scale, they're kind of in the middle, I would say, in terms of size. Okay, let's move on, and the next manufacturer is Accurascale, who made 4 new announcements and 3 new releases over the past year, which again is a bit surprising. I kind of felt like they'd done a bit more than that. Again, possibly I've missed some of it out, but hopefully I haven't. So their announcements were the BR 16-ton mineral wagons, the 57XX pannier tank and the other similar classes too. They announced the HTO and the HTV 21-ton wagons, and also more recently of course their new Class 60. In terms of new releases, they launched the Manor class over the past year. They also released their Banana vans, and then finally the new Class 66. Now I'm counting this as it's been heavily modified by Accurascale, but you might think that this shouldn't be counted as an ex-Hattons model, so if you consider that to be the case, call it 2 new releases instead of 3. So in terms of that ratio again between announcements and releases, that's 1 announcement per 0.8 releases. So they're announcing just a little bit more than they're releasing, just like Heljan were, and that's kind of what you'd expect from a company that is growing, as we know Accurascale is doing. They also produce a couple of O-gauge models. They've started in O-gauge, so obviously that's going to be using some of their time and resources as well. But for 00 scale, that is it. Okay, let's move on. We are now coming to the second largest manufacturer. Is it Hornby or not? Yes, it's Hornby. Yep, that's right. By my estimations, they are no longer the top anymore. they have actually made farcically few new announcements in 00 scale. In fact, only one if my count is correct. Again, please, if I've missed anything, do let me know and I will add it to the description. But yeah, only one as far as I can tell, but they have made a lot of new releases over the past year, which is why they're still quite near the top. However, if they don't announce more soon, then they're going to start dropping down this pecking order, I think. So in terms of new announcements, Hornby are in the unique position of actually going backwards. They have announced one new model, which I'll reveal in just a second, but they've also cancelled a load. So actually the number of new announcements is now negative. So yeah, they cancelled the Great Western Macaw B wagons. They also cancelled the Bogey Bolster C, never going to see those released. And more recently, they cancelled Queen Adelaide Saloon. So that is a major cancellation too. Their announcement, of course, was Locomotion number 1, which at the moment hasn't been cancelled, and that, as far as I could find, was the only new tooled 00 locomotive or rolling stock that Hornby have announced over this past year. Now obviously they've announced an awful lot in TT scale, but that's not 00, we're just talking 00 today. Okay, but Hornby did release a lot this year. So their 8 releases were as follows. Again, correct me if I'm missing anything. Turbomotive, that was a big one. The Ruston 88 diesel shunter, I believe they've also cancelled some of the other locos in that batch, but they did release some of them. The standard class 2MT came out over the past year too, as did the Liverpool and Manchester Royal Mail coach, and also the second class coach. I've counted these as 2 models, but you might want to consider them as just one, because they are very, very similar projects. They also released the Black 5, of course, a pity about that one, the new TTA tanker, which was amazing, and of course, most recently, the B17/5. So that is a ratio of just 1 model announced per 8 models released over the past year. So at the moment, they're really not announcing very much at all, which suggests a serious shrinkage in their investment in 00 scale. But there's lots to bear in mind here. Obviously, Hornby have a huge back catalogue of existing models that they still produce and still have in their range. So it's not like Hornby models are disappearing entirely at the moment. It's just that new items do seem to be drying up. Also, Hornby do seem to be shifting their focus very heavily towards TT scale, where there have actually been loads of models announced and released over this past year. So does that mean that they are slowly turning their back on 00 scale? Well, looking at this year, it would certainly seem so. Maybe though they will announce more models in the future for 00 scale, and they'll keep their sort of place as a relevant company producing 00. It is a little bit early to say whether they are turning their back on 00 scale, or whether they're just still playing catch up at the moment. But I think it's fair to say they are being thrashed by their competitors in 00 scale, so perhaps they are retreating to TT scale where there is less competition. I suppose only time will tell. Okay, so now we come to the most prolific of the 00 scale manufacturers by my estimations, of course, and that is Rapido Trains UK. Now this has been very hard to put together because Rapido have an awful lot of products, far more actually than a lot of the others have announced over the past year, and it's quite tricky to figure out which products are part of the same tooling suite or which are separate products, so I've done my best. Please do correct me if I'm wrong, but by my count they have made 9 new announcements this year. Phew, that's a lot, and they've matched that in terms of releases as well nearly, by making 8 new releases. So announcements, let's go through these quite quickly. Lots of locos here. The J52, the 1/801 fish fans, the Caledonia Fireless locos, a huge range of those announced, the SECR Class 01, very elegant 060 tender engine, the Port of Par Bagnall twins, 2 more saddle tank engines, the Caledonian Diagram 67 vans, the Great Western N19 and 018 5 planks. Consider these to be 2 separate products if you like. I've put them together. They are quite similar. It's up to you on that one. They announced the L&MR Diagram 88 vans and the Great Western Open Sea wagons. In terms of releases, they managed to get out their Metropolitan Railway E-Class. The 15XX Pannier came out this year as well. Their Great Western 5-plank 011 wagons, those are out. The Mink A vans and Banana vans, those are out. They released the Wisbeach and Upwell tramway coaches, quite significant coaches, these, and also of course their Titfield Thunderbolt train packs. Lion was released before the period that I'm focusing on today, but these packs did have some new rolling stock in them, so I'm considering those new. They also released their 08A wagons, and finally the LMS 1666 open wagons. And in addition to all of this, Rapido also produced N-scale models as well. So not only are Rapido announcing a lot, which is easy to do, they're also releasing an awful lot as well. So that ratio between announcements and releases is 1 to 0.9, which means that they're announcing and releasing models at approximately the same rate, which is good to see. That means that the models are coming through nice and smoothly. Now, bear in mind a lot of their releases have been rolling stock and wagons, which are obviously cheaper and less complex than locomotives, whereas a lot of the other manufacturers have been more locomotive focused, but there's still a couple of new releases of locos this year from Rapido. So on the whole, a very, very impressive turnout by them. So there we have it, some very surprising and interesting results there. The two entities that are usually considered to be the top, that's Hornby and Bachmann, don't really seem to be up there anymore, and Bachmann far from it. Now it's interesting to note that these two biggest companies do seem to be shifting their priorities to more proprietary scales, these being TT scale and NG7 scale respectively. Perhaps it's possible that they're not able to compete anymore in 00 scale. So here is the ranking, the most prolific manufacturer from biggest to smallest. We have Rapido at the top, followed by Hornby, Accurascale, Dapol, Bachmann and Heljan. Do remember though, this is just in terms of new models. This is not a reflection of the quantity of models sold, just the number of new products. So I'm not saying that Rapido have the biggest sales of all the manufacturers. I don't have access to that data. But in terms of the number of products, Rapido is currently the leader by a long, long way. And personally, I'd be fascinated to try this test again in a year's time to see how the standings have changed. Please remember though, this is not definitive. Obviously, most of these manufacturers have models in the pipeline that could be released at any time. That could change the standings. I'm sure there are also announcements just around the corner as well, which would also change these standings. So it's all just a rough idea. But hopefully you found this interesting, and hopefully it gave you at least some insight into which manufacturer has been the busiest. But anyway, please do comment down below, let me know what you think. Is there anything that I've missed? And do you think that it is Rapido leading the way at the moment, or is there something that I've missed? For now though, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Alright, cheers folks, you take care.